We resume on the SS Aqua as the harbour grows further and further away. Red is continuing his explanation of the world tour he and his young protégés are about to undertake, telling Ash and AJ how they will be visiting several different regions so the boys can see what the wider world is really like. He also encourages them both to catch Pokemon while there, since he expects one of them to one day defeat him, and for that they'll need a truly world-class team. Ash and AJ look at each other and gulp at the intensity in Red's voice, a fact which the champ picks up on, and so breezily adds that it also pays to make new friends around the world. Ash nods and asks where their first port of call will be, to which Red replies that first they'll be visiting the Johto region, though this will only be a very brief visit since they're only stopping long enough to collect Blue and his students before moving on to more unfamiliar pastures. The word students is not lost on AJ, and he asks who else Blue is training, having heard of Gary already from Ash. Red chuckles that Blue got jealous of him having a second apprentice, and so took one for himself, though he suspects that if asked, he'd claim that it was complete coincidence. Ash smiles that he can't wait to meet them, with Red nodding his approval. He then offers to give them a tour of the ship, starting with the main deck, which he shows are equipped with regulation strength Pokemon battlefields, so the boys can cut loose in their training without fear of wrecking the boat. He then leads them inside and up a flight of stairs to the command deck. Surge is there with a group of other sailors who all greet the trio warmly. Surge explains that he is the captain of the Aqua, so he'll be the one ferrying them from region to region. He then guffaws that it's been a while since Red had him do this, but that anecdote dies in his throat when he sees the coldness filling Red's eyes at his comment. He instead offers to show them around, but Red says the lieutenant should probably focus on steering, and that he can cover the tour. Surge salutes, and so Red and his disciples depart. Their next stop is an onboard medical facility. While not quite a full Pokemon Center, it has a healing machine and a few beds as well as a small group of nurses who claim that they can look after any injured Pokemon the group have. Ash hands the lead nurse Pikachu, who is still unconscious from its battle with Surge, and so he, AJ, and Red depart while the nurse and her cohort get to work. Next up is the giant dining area, which excites Ash when he sees that they have a buffet, followed by the accommodations. Being a fully sized luxury liner, Ash, Red and AJ each get their own cabins, and so this is where the champ leaves the boys. For his parting words, he tells them that they are free to do whatever they want until they reach Cianwood City, but he urges them not to slack off, since this is a training trip, not a vacation. The boys both nod, and then Ash goes back to his cabin to rest a bit after the morning he's had. A few hours later, Ash is woken by a knocking at his door. Throwing it open, he is almost bowled over when Pikachu leaps into his arms. Ash hugs his partner while the nurse who brought it tells him that dinner will be served shortly if he would like to join the others for something to eat. Ash thanks him for the tip and goes sprinting off to the dining area where Red and AJ are already engaged in conversation. When AJ sees Ash, he asks if he knew that the ship has an inbuilt exercise gym almost as good as Anthony's back in Saffron. Red explains that AJ spent the afternoon exploring, to which Ash rubs the back of his head and admits that he spent it napping. AJ chides Ash for this, saying that Master Red told them not to goof off, but Ash fires back that he wasn't. He was recovering his strength after his big gym battle. AJ says that if that's true, they should have a battle right after dinner, to which Ash says he's on, prompting the two boys to immediately start eating as fast as they can, while Red just shakes his head with a faint smile on his lips. When they are done, Ash and AJ then race up to the deck, each trying to shoulder the other out of the way. AJ is the first to make it to the battlefield, and so declares that he wins, but Ash protests that he won the eating race, so they're tied, meaning the battle will settle things. AJ decides to let his Pokemon do the talking, and so brings out his Sandshrew, prompting Ash to do the same as the pair of ground types square off. Then as one they run at each other. Fury swipes from AJ's clashing with Fury Cutter from Ash's. Back and forth the pair swing at each other with their claws, but as it has always been, AJ's Sandshrew promptly takes the lead, driving its rival to a knee with a well-placed hit. It then raises a claw to deliver a finishing blow, but is stopped when Ash's Sandshrew uses Sand Attack to throw grit in AJ's Sandshrew's eyes, blinding it. It then seizes the opportunity to lay into its blinded foe with Fury Cutter, each hit doing more damage than the last. The fourth consecutive hit is enough to even send AJ's Sandshrew into the air, but it's able to curl into a ball and bounce back. using the wind to blow the sand out of its eyes. It then attempts a counterattack, slamming into Ash's Sandshrew as a ball and bowling it over. Ash's Sandshrew balls up to avoid injury as well, and so the pair of Pokemon uncoil at the same time and lunge at each other once more just as they did at the start. However, this time there is no flurry of blows. Instead, it is a single concentrated hit each with all of their strength behind it. This clash of will comes to a deadlock, with neither side being able to penetrate the other's defenses. But then something changes. Such is Ash's Sandshrew's determination to finally get a win over its opponent that it allows white light to wash over it, as it grows in size and thick spines burst from its back. When the light fades, the newly evolved Sandslash has no trouble overcoming Sandshrew, and with a single thrust of its bladed claws, sends AJ's Sandshrew stumbling backwards. Sandslash then curls up into a ball and launches itself forward, its newly learned bulldoze attack causing it to hit Sandshrew with the force of a car. This time there is no chance to curl up in defense, and so as Sandslash rolls over the top of Sandshrew, the smaller mouse Pokemon's eyes revert to the spirals of unconsciousness. As AJ returns his starter, Ash runs in to hug Sandslash, though for his efforts he receives a nasty surprise when the pointed needles on Sandslash's back poke into his arms. Sandslash is equally delighted, and throws its bladed claws around his neck to celebrate this milestone together. Pikachu adds its congratulations by shocking Sandslash, an act which only tickles the electric-immune ground type, and so the Pokemon pair go off to play. AJ then approaches Ash, offering a hand which the other boy shakes. AJ says he's impressed that Ash finally beat him in Sandshrew, though there is definite disappointment in his voice as well, but Ash just smiles that it's only since him and Sandslash have been able to train with AJ and Sandshrew, saying that they've been just as essential to their growth as Red has. This lightens AJ's mood and he pats Ash on the back, grinning that he's gonna go explore the ship some more, so Ash can join him if he wants, that is unless he wants to be a lazybones and have another nap. The green-haired youth then takes off, laughing while behind him Ash gives chase, yelling that he is not a lazy bones. It is morning by the time the SS Aqua pulls into sea in Wood Harbor, and Ash, AJ, and Red are all eager to disembark. Blue is standing at the dock, and beside him is someone that comes as a surprise to Ash and AJ, Joe from Pokemon Tech. As AJ goes to introduce himself to Blue, this being the first time meeting Blue in person, Ash approaches Joe and asks what he's doing here. Joe explains that like he said he wanted to retrace Ash's steps, and so headed back to Viridian City to challenge Gary and maybe Blue. Ash asks how that went, and Joe nervously mutters that Gary wiped the floor with him. But during that fight, Blue saw something in Joe and so asked him to stick around as one of his gym trainers. A little tactlessly, Ash asks just what he saw in him, and Joe replies that Blue said it was the potential for greatness, but he's not so sure since he's never even been able to match Gary. It is at this point that Ash notices that Gary isn't here, and so asks Blue where he is. Gary points a thumb to a large building resembling a dojo, and so Ash runs off, hoping to gauge his rival's growth in their time apart. Upon entering, however, Ash sees that Gary is already engaged in battle with someone, a rotund gentleman with an apparent distaste for shirts, who is using a Poliwrath to combat Gary's Blastoise, which Ash can easily assume evolved from the Wartortle he fought before. Blastoise and Poliwrath are locked in a grapple, trying to push each other back, but then Gary has Blastoise level its cannons at Poliwrath. Poliwrath throws up its arms to defend from the incoming blasts of pressurized water, but it turns out that this was a feint, as instead of firing, Blastoise uses the fact that its opponent's arms aren't holding it back anymore to shoulder charge Poliwrath, knocking it onto its back. Blastoise then follows up with a massive belly flop that flattens the water fighting type. And when Blastoise rises, Poliwrath is unable to battle. Gary then recalls his Pokemon and humbly bows to his opponent, a very un-Gary-like response, thanking him for his tutelage. The beefy man laughs with a sound like rolling thunder and claps the youth on the back, saying it was his pleasure to whip his old apprentices into shape, and he truly believes that with time he will be as great as his cousin, though he fears their time together has come to an end. Gary tracks the man's eye line and turns around to see Ash watching him, now with Red, Blue, AJ, and Joe not far behind. Blue saunters over to shake the shirtless man's hand, calling him Master Chuck, and expressing his own gratitude for how the older man helped train his boys. Chuck laughs louder still, and says that next time Blue should get in on the training as well, since he's probably the only man left who isn't afraid to knock the world-famous Blue on his world-famous butt. Blue grimaces that he'd actually have to beat him first, while Red glides over to join the two men's conversation, grinning that he's also not afraid to put Blue in his place. Blue playfully snipes back that if they had a real battle now, he'd win for sure, since while Red's been on some mountain freezing his nose off for years, he's been consistently pushing himself to improve, while facing off against the strongest the next generation has to offer. Red slyly replies that they'll soon know who the strongest of the next generation truly is, and for once Blue agrees, adopting a similar smile and nodding. Though this unity is promptly shattered when in unison the two mentors proudly declare that it's going to be one of their students. Chuck lightly tells the pair to break it up, while the four students all share similar looks of confusion at what their teachers are talking about, but they get no explanation as Red rounds them up and leads them all back to the Aqua. When they are on board, he gives the go-ahead to Surge, and he takes them back out to sea. Ash complains that he wanted to do some exploring, but Red promises they can have a proper chance to travel Johto on the way back. For now they're on a schedule, and they need to be in Kalos in a matter of days. Gary asks what the rush is, and Red can't help but think how very much this boy is like his cousin at his age. But nonetheless, he explains, telling the four boys that they have been chosen to represent Kanto in an international competition, and as part of this trip it is their job to gather the other teams and escort them to the final location where the tournament will take place. When this announcement is finished, Ash and AJ pump their fists in excitement, while Gary cockily replies that it's only natural he was selected for such a prestigious job. The only one who doesn't seem happy with the news is Joe, and he asks if it's too late to pick a different fourth representative, since he doesn't think he's up to the job. Beside him, Gary sighs that they really need to work on Joe's confidence, but his tone definitely has an air of fondness to it. Shockingly enough, Ash agrees with Gary, saying that what Joe needs is a battle to lift his spirits, offering to be his opponent if he wants. Joe frantically says that he couldn't hope to take on the Pikachu who beat Giselle, but Ash says he has some other Pokemon so he can just battle one of them instead. Meekly, Joe agrees and so trudges over to the field and sends out a cute little Teddiursa who growls in an attempt to be menacing, but only winds up looking more cuddly. With Pikachu out of the question and a mounting fear of Sand/cutting the little bear to ribbons, Ash chooses Clefairy as his Pokemon. For a moment he waits for Joe to call the first move, but when the other boy doesn't, he takes the initiative and orders a wake-up slap. The attack hits and deals super effective damage as Clefairy clotheslines Teddiursa and sends it tumbling backwards. Joe cries that he and Teddiursa surrender, raising its Pokeball as Gary and AJ both yell at Ash that he shouldn't have used a fighting type move like that. Ash feels bad, and so promises not to do it again if Joe gives him a second chance and keeps battling. Joe looks unsure, but Ash encourages him, saying that Teddiursa has gotten back up, so he should too. After all, he said he wanted to follow Ash's path, and part of that means never running away from a fight. Joe considers this, then nods. Ash beams back that the next move is his, and so Joe tells his Pokemon to use Payback, postulating that even with Clefairy's resistance to Dark-type moves, the power increase from being hit already should be able to do some serious damage back. Dark smoky aura then begins emanating from Teddiursa, and it runs in with a roar, but Ash tells Clefairy to counter it with a Moonblast Slap. A glowing pink orb forms in the Fairy-type's hand, and it too charges in. Darkness and light collide in the center of the battlefield, before detonating and sending both Pokemon tumbling backwards. Using its training at Anthony's gym, Clefairy spins in midair, bouncing back thanks to its spring-like tail. Meanwhile, Joe's Teddiursa relies on sheer grit to claw itself to a stop, and lunges at its opponent. Ash calls for another Moonblast Slap, but this time Teddiursa slides underneath, and leaps up, using a surprise Metal Claw to rake its claws upwards along Clefairy's chest and face. Clefairy staggers a little in the face of super effective damage, and so Joe orders Teddiursa to repeat the move, resulting in another slash of metallic claws against Clefairy's front, this time horizontally. Ash is a little shocked by how well Joe is doing, and so tells Clefairy to retreat and use Metronome. Clefairy does so, its fingers glowing while Joe tells Teddiursa to follow and use Metal Claw for a third time. Teddiursa roars as it charges, but by the time it has reached Clefairy, the Fairy type is leapt high into the air and is now coming down at top speeds, one foot extended and pointed right at Teddiursa. Ash, AJ, Gary and Joe all exclaim at once that this is High Jump Kick, knowing that if it hits, such a powerful fighting move will surely mean the end for the normal type. However, Joe doesn't seem scared as he watches the pink Pokemon hurtle towards his partner, and when it begins closing in, he tells Teddiursa to use the move Blue and Charizard taught them. Teddiursa nods, then raises its hands, catching Clefairy's ankle before the kick can connect, before beginning to spin. Faster and faster Teddy Ursa goes, until it and Clefairy appear as a blur together. It is then that Joe reveals the name of the move, Seismic Toss. At this, Teddy Ursa lets go of its prey, and poor helpless Clefairy goes flying. A moment later there is a painful clang as Clefairy's skull collides with the deck railing, and between this and the crash damage from the failed high jump kick, the pink Pokemon is unconscious when it hits the ground. Ash returns Clefairy with his thanks before smiling at Joe and congratulating him on his win, saying he knew Joe was stronger than he thought. However, Joe says he only won because Ash took it easy on him and didn't use Wake Up Slap. Ash tries to protest, but Joe has already returned Teddy Ursa and headed below deck. Ash tries to run after the other boy, but Blue stops him, saying that Joe's the type of person who assumes every failure is his fault and every success is thanks to external factors, and the more you try to convince him otherwise, the more he retreats into his shell. Ash scowls that he shouldn't be that way since he's actually really strong, but Blue says that they'll have to wait for him to figure that out on his own. He then pats Ash on the shoulder and smirks that it doesn't matter since he knows Ash is going to do the opposite of what he says anyway. Ash gives Blue a quizzical look, and the older oak almost bursts out in laughter before chuckling, "Genetic predisposition." Though, it is unclear if this is meant as a response to his unspoken question, or a verbalization of a different thought entirely. As Blue and Gary depart to find Joe, Red claps Ash on the shoulder, and tells him that it was a good fight, though Moonblast could still use some work. Ash nods and makes a mental promise to get back to training as soon as Clefairy is healed. It is afternoon before Clefairy is ready to resume training again, and so the pair set to work trying to create a throwable Moonblast. However, by the time night falls, they are no further along, with the Moonblast still dissipating before they can hit either Pikachu or Sandslash, who have volunteered themselves as targets. Still, the team press on, not noticing the time until Gary of all people comes up on deck. Annoyed at his lack of progress, Ash demands to know what he wants, and in a perfectly calm voice, Gary replies that Ash missed dinner. Ash snaps back that he doesn't see why that would matter to Gary, and Gary replies that it also means Ash hasn't fed his Pokemon, and they deserve better, since as their trainer it's his responsibility to take care of them. This irks Ash, thinking that this is Gary saying that he is a bad trainer, but then the Oak Boy tosses him a can of Pokemon food, and tells Ash to give it to his Pokemon since it's a formula created by his cousin that will give his Pokemon the quick burst of energy they need to keep going, but also has enough nutrients that they won't be left hungry later. Ash asks why Gary's doing this for him, and Gary shrugs that they're teammates now, and he can't have Ash running his Pokemon into the ground before the tournament. Ash thanks his rival, the simple act feeling strange to him, but Gary shrugs it off, saying it's only practical, and according to Blue that's how he, Red and Green used to do things, capitalizing on each other's unique strength to be the best that they could be. Ash doesn't recognize this third name, but that also means it doesn't mean much to him, and so he instead asks the more pressing question of what specific skills Red and Blue have. Gary explains that in their youth, Professor Oak gave each of the Pokédex holders a nickname. Red was the fighter, the most skilled battler in the world, while Blue was the trainer, having a gift for raising Pokemon second to none. As Ash gives each of his Pokemon some of Blue's food, he can't deny that Oak probably had a point with those nicknames, considering how all three of them perk right up after only one bite. Seeing his team so fired up, Ash asks Gary if he wants to battle, but the other boy shakes his head, saying he's going to give his Pokemon a chance to rest since they've been training non-stop with Chuck and Blue. He then encourages Ash to do the same, since determination is a good thing, but obsession can lead to trouble down the line. Ash snaps back that he's not obsessed, he's just following Red's training regiment, but Gary doesn't seem to care, sauntering away with a chuckle of, "Whatever you say, Ashy boy." The next morning comes, and this time Ash doesn't skip his meal, enjoying breakfast with AJ, Red, Blue, Joe, Gary, and Lieutenant Surge, all of whom gather around a big banquet table. The two teachers ask what their charge's plans are for the day, with Joe planning to do some reading while Gary plans to battle some of the off-duty sailors, stating that he eventually wants to work his way up to Surge for his badge, even though they aren't technically at the gym. Surge says that he is welcome to challenge him at any time, and so Joe weighs in that eventually he would like to do that too, earning the same offer from the lieutenant. The attention then turns to Ash and AJ, both of whom shock the others by saying that they actually plan to take the day off and enjoy some of the Aqua's recreational facilities before the other representatives arrive. Blue calls this wise, while Red doesn't comment beyond saying that he hopes they have fun. The kids then ask what their mentors will be doing, and they reply that they've got work to do getting the tourney set up and coordinating with the other coaches. They then bid everyone farewell before heading towards a large conference room several decks down. Ash and AJ depart next, bringing out all their Pokemon and heading down to a giant playroom for some R&R. Inside is every type of entertainment imaginable, and so humans and Pokemon all find something to enjoy. Ash and Pikachu start by riding the train around the room, while Sandshrew and Sandslash make use of the ball pit, albeit with Clefairy being its usual prankster self and popping up occasionally behind the ground types to give them a fright. However, none have as much fun as Charmander and AJ on the swing set. Charmander loves the feeling of soaring through the air, and AJ is happy to push it, especially since he can see that each time a new arc begins, the lingering pain in its eyes from Damien's mistreatment all fades away. They later move on to the seesaw, and even mess around on the balancing balls for a while. All the while, Charmander is at the liveliest Ash and AJ have ever seen it, so much so that Ash suggests that for the next while, AJ keep it out of its ball, since it seems to enjoy doing new things with its trainer. AJ thinks this is a little unorthodox, but having seen the wonders it has done for Ash and Pikachu's bond, agrees. He then lifts Charmander onto his shoulder and gives it a piggyback as he runs out of the room. It takes another few days for the SS Aqua to reach Kalos, with Ash and AJ keeping up this new routine of one day of intense training, followed by a day of rest or play. By doing this, they find all sorts of new fun things to do on the ship, and are sometimes joined in their escapades by Joe, and on one rare occasion Gary when they discover a miniature cinema on board. Eventually they dock in Ambrette Town, with a very tired Red and Blue leading the boys as they disembark. Blue tells the others that they will stay here, since this is where they'll be meeting the other representatives, while Red will head into Lumio City to collect the last two members of Team Kalos. Ash asks if he can go with his mentor, having seen very little of him over the past few days, and though Red seems a little hesitant, he agrees, telling Ash that while they're in the city, he should check out Professor Sycamore's Pokemon lab. Ash agrees, and so Red brings out Aero, his Aerodactyl, climbing onto its back with Ash following. He then turns back and asks if AJ wants to come along too, but the green-haired boy shakes his head, saying he grew up in the countryside, so he's never been a fan of loud cities. Ash and Red nod their acknowledgement, and so take off at surprising speed considering the additional weight their bodies have put on Aero. When they are gone, Blue asks the three remaining boys if they want to join him in the world-famous Ambrette Fossil Lab, since he was able to book a tour where they actually get to walk with the revived Pokemon. Gary and Joe both eagerly accept, albeit with Gary trying to play it cool and mask his eagerness. But once more AJ refuses, saying that Master Red told him to catch rare and powerful Pokemon, so that's gotta be his first priority before he can enjoy himself. Blue chuckles that he was just like AJ as a kid, and so completely understands and wishes him happy hunting, before he and his students head down the main street towards the lab. Inside they are greeted by a scientist named Thaddeus, who welcomes the trio and offers them each a thick winter coat, since most of their biomes are climate controlled to accommodate Pokemon who are accustomed to a colder planet. However, first they visit the aquarium section of the lab, where Blue and Gary look on in wonder at Omanite, Omastar, Kabuto, and Kabutops, while Joe quickly befriends a shy Tortuga, who seems reassured by the boy's kind smile and seems to like it when he claps twice, simulating the gesture every time he does it. After this, they move on to the ancient aviary to watch Archeops and Aerodactyl in a perfect simulation of their natural habitat. Meanwhile, many miles away, Aero touches down in Lumio City, having covered ground much faster in the air. Here Ash and Red decide to stop in and have a late breakfast of Lumio Skelettes, with Ash asking about the trainers they're here to meet. Red explains that their names are Alan and Clement, and they are set to meet in Lysander Cafe later today, though for now he has another meeting to attend to, and unfortunately this one he can't bring Ash to. Ash looks put out by this news, but Red assures him that he'll love Sycamore Lab, and the rest of the city. Ash gives a half-hearted little nod, and so the champ and he take a taxi to the lab, all the while a pair of yellow eyes survey them from a nearby tree. The Sycamore Pokemon Lab is a grand building, and when the duo step inside they are greeted warmly by Professor Augustine Sycamore. Red shakes the man's hand with a smile and asks how he has been. Sycamore replies that he can't complain when he gets to spend his days studying Pokemon and imparting knowledge to the next generation, though by the looks of things, Red's doing the same these days. Red nods and introduces Ash, who comments that Sycamore is very different from Professor Oak. The professor replies that of course he is, he's a much better dresser, a statement which makes the three of them laugh as they head further inside. Sycamore asks Ash if he knows much about the Pokemon of the Kalos region, with Ash replying that he doesn't, and so the professor leads him to a large domed habitat full of Pokemon that Ash has never seen before. Sycamore then points out two of them, naming them as Fennekin and Chespin, the fire and grass starters of the Kalos region respectively. Ash asks where the water starter is, and Sycamore explains that he recently sent Froakie, the water type, off with a new trainer just last week, and he is yet to acquire a new one. Ash says it's a shame since he would have liked to see it, but Sycamore chuckles and offers him to go explore the habitat as a way to make it up to the boy. Ash is quite happy to accept this offer, and so he goes tearing off into the indoor park. Red calls out to have fun, and that he'll be back later with Alana and Clement. He then thanks Sycamore for his hospitality, before departing into the winding streets of Lumio City. However, instead of heading straight for Magenta Plaza and Lysander Cafe, Red takes a detour down the winding back alleys of North Boulevard before coming to a stop outside a faded door. Knocking thrice in a coded sequence, the champ waits for a moment before the door is pulled open, and a man in a trench coat ushers him inside. When the door is closed, Red greets the other man saying, "Hello, handsome," but the other dryly replies that his codename is Looker now, prompting Red to joke that he liked the old name better. Looker shakes his head, though with an amused smile at the edge of his dour lips. He then asks what Red wants, joking that he should consider giving up this trainer business and becoming a PI, since he was able to find him despite all his efforts of staying hidden. Red shoots back that there's a sign over the door bearing the logo of the International Police, so he obviously didn't put that much effort into staying incognito. Looker nods that he'll take that under advisement, but chides Red that he still hasn't told him what he wants. All jest then drops from Red's voice, and he says, "Same thing I wanted last time, information on Giovanni." Meanwhile, back with AJ, he and Charmander have scoured the beach looking for wild Pokemon, though the place seems to be deserted. Sandshrew has even tried tunneling underground to see if there are Pokemon down there, but once again zilch. Just when he thinks it might be time to move on, AJ spots a Corsola cowering in a rock pool not too far away. Running to check it out with Charmander and Sandshrew at his heels, AJ finds that there is actually a small conclave of water Pokemon assembled here. All of them look terrified as they lay food at the feet of a giant Barbaracle. Even for someone unfamiliar with the species, AJ can tell that this Pokemon is huge and powerful, and he imagines with glee how impressed Master Red would be if he could add it to his team. However, before he can step forth and challenge it to battle, something equally unfortunate and avoidable occurs. Charmander, having taken its place at AJ's side, now finds itself standing quite close to the shore, and when the tide comes in, it lets out a little involuntary yelp as it pulls its tail and life-preserving flame away from the incoming water. This sound is all it takes to alert Barbaracle to the group's presence, and as it looks down at them, it snarls with eyes full of hate. The moment of calm is then broken as Barbaracle lets out a savage roar and lunges at Charmander with its lower arms glowing thanks to Razor Shell. Without needing instruction, Sandshrew leaps in, curling into a ball and utilizing the bulldoze attack it learned from Ash's Sandslash to clash with the Razor Shell. However, this is super effective on it just as it would have been on Charmander, and so Barbaracle is able to push through, swiping up and sending Sandshrew flying back towards town. It then leers at AJ and Charmander with menace in its eyes, and the pair know what they must do. Though it pains AJ to run from a fight, his top priority is to make sure Sandshrew is alright and Charmander remains safe, and so swallowing his pride, he gives the order to run. Ash is thoroughly enjoying his time at the lab, having already seen a dozen new species of Pokemon that he'd never heard of before, though unfortunately the professor has forbidden him from catching any of them, since they either belong to other trainers or are part of his research. However, Ash's good time is brought to an abrupt halt when his ears are filled with a screech of tires, followed a moment later by a bang. Rushing outside, Ash sees that a red delivery van has struck a lamppost and fallen on its side, trapping the driver and passenger inside. All around him people are staring in horror or morbid fascination, but no one is helping, and so without thinking Ash runs in to assist, while the unseen yellow eyes from before look at the young man with heightened interest. Pikachu leaps down from Ash's shoulder and he tells it to check on the downed lamppost, while he and Sandslash try to get the passenger side door open. Ash then, with the help of the ground type, clambers onto the side of the truck, which is now facing skyward, and crawls his way over to the door. It is heavily dented after the collision, and so despite the best efforts of himself and the red-haired passenger, they cannot force it open. However, this is what Sandslash is here for, and so it sinks its two claws into the metal door and begins to cut through. It is slow going, as even with both claws at work, it is difficult to carve through a solid metal door, and unfortunately time is not on their side. After hitting the lamp, the truck seems to have started leaking oil, and despite Pikachu's best efforts, one errant spark from the exposed wiring is all it takes to set this oil trail alight. Fire rushes towards the vehicle where Ash, Sandslash, and the two unnamed figures all are, and there is no time to react. However, moments before the flames can come into proximity with the fuel line, a blue blur bolts from the trees and hurls foam, which extinguishes the flames on contact. The identity of their savior is then revealed moments later to be a blue Pokemon that Ash doesn't know, who springs up to the truck and begins pounding on the door. This weakens the metal enough that Sandslash is able to have an easier time cutting it, and together the duo are able to make more headway. At this point, Sycamore joins them with his Garchomp, and together the 3 Pokemon and 2 humans are able to peel away the dented door and get the trapped pair to safety. When he is outside, the red-headed passenger thanks Ash profusely for his help. He is a well-dressed man, tall and broad-shouldered with a mane of thick red hair and beard. He introduces himself as Lysander, and something about that name twigs in Ash's brain. Sycamore elaborates that Lysander is a genius billionaire cafe-owning philanthropist, and this at last reminds Ash where he's heard that name before, asking if he runs the Lysander Cafe. Lysander beams that he's pleased someone from clearly not around here has heard of his little establishment, but Ash grins that he actually heard of it from a friend who is meeting some people there. Lysander seems unbothered by this, and simply offers to show Ash the way, and as they walk, they can discuss a reward for saving him. Ash smiles that he doesn't need a reward, he was just doing what had to be done, and it was really the blue Pokemon who saved them. The Pokemon in question, who had up until this point been helping the driver retrieve a metal crate from the back of the truck, looks up when it's mentioned. As the driver picks up the crate and carries it down a side street, Sycamore tells Ash that this is the Froakie he told him about, though he wonders where Froakie's trainer is. Froakie sticks its chin out defiantly when its trainer is mentioned, clear disdain on its face, and Sycamore sighs that it must have abandoned another trainer for not living up to its standards. Lysander turns and briefly thanks Froakie, before looking back to Ash and asking if he would still like to accompany him to the cafe. Ash eagerly accepts, and so as Pikachu scampers back onto Ash's shoulder and Sandslash returns to its ball, Ash and Lysander head off. However, they can only go a few steps before Ash feels a weight of something on his ankle. Looking back, he sees Froakie looking up at him with fierce determination in its eyes. Ash looks confused, so Sycamore explains that he's pretty sure Froakie has deemed him worthy of being its trainer and so wants to travel with him, which is impressive since it has already rejected several trainers in the past. Ash smiles that maybe Froakie just hasn't found the right trainer yet, and so holds out a ball, which the little frog leaps up and taps, securing its capture. Back at the fossil lab, Gary, Blue, and Joe have made their way into the Ice Age room, and are very grateful for their thick coats. The temperature is well below freezing, and the trio have to traipse through knee-deep snow, but it's all worth it when they see the Pokemon here. None of them have ever seen an Aurorus before, and its majesty truly is a sight to behold, with the billowing sail-like fins on the back of its head. While the clumsy movements of Arctozolt as it attempts to skate on a frozen lake are comedic in their way, but also a bit sad when they consider how ungainly it is. But one thing that isn't sad is the baby Amora that runs out from its parents' legs to greet the humans when they arrive. Joe and Blue both give the little one plenty of love, but it seems to take a particular liking to Gary, especially when he brings out his Blastoise who is able to make chunks of frozen water for it to nibble on. Thaddeus comments that this little Amora is known for its friendly personality, but even still he doubts it likes him who helped raise it from an egg half as much as it has come to like Gary in only a matter of minutes. Gary grins that he has that effect on girls, with Thaddeus asking how he knows Amora is female, to which Gary just laughs that you don't grow up the grandson of the world's foremost Pokemon researcher, and cousin of the world's best Pokemon trainer without learning a thing or two about Pokemon. He then scratches Amora under the chin and feeds it more ice, until a loud crashing sound from above draws all their attention. Looking up, they see one of the skylights on the ceiling shatter as a yellow ball hurtles down into the snow. It makes impact with a heavy thump that sends powdery snow flying everywhere, and as Blue approaches the projectile, he sees that it's AJ's Sandshrew, very unconscious after that fall. Just as the Master Trainer is about to ask where on earth AJ could be, the boy makes an appearance, running through the door with Charmander at his heels. When he sees his beaten Sandshrew, he cries out its name and runs to its side. However, there is little more he can do when seconds later Barbaracle bursts into the biome, roaring madly and glaring at AJ and Charmander. Returning Sandshrew to its ball, AJ turns back to face the barnacled barbarian with an equally firm gaze, ready to battle it now that he knows his partner is safe. He then instructs the others to get out of there, apologizing that he led such a fearsome Pokemon in here, but promising to keep their battle contained as best he can. However, Gary just laughs, saying he can't seriously expect them to leave him here to face this monstrosity alone, while Joe nods along with his fellow student, declaring that the two of them will fight with him to prevent Barbaracle from ruining the prehistoric Pokemon Pokemon's home. The three boys then square up against Barbaracle, who stares each of them down as they bring out their Pokemon. For AJ, he has no choice but to use Charmander since Sandshrew is down for the count. Joe in turn brings out his Teddiursa, while Gary reaches for one of his Pokeballs, only for Amora to scamper up and yap a declaration that it will fight for Gary. Barbaracle starts things off by banging on its chest, causing the rocky armor coating its torso to fall away. Joe knowledgeably tells the others that this move is called Shell Smash, and that in return for lowering its defense a little, it raises its attack power by a lot. AJ snaps back that he doesn't need to know what it's called, he just needs to beat it, which he declares he will, ordering a flamethrower. Charmander opens its maw, and from it bursts a gout of flames, but Barbaracle shrugs this off and advances on the trio, still pounding itself in the chest to dislodge even more stone. Teddiursa then leaps into the fray, slashing Barbaracle's newly exposed chest with a metal claw, while Gary checks his Pokédex, and upon seeing his Pokemon's moves, has Amora use Ancient Power. Spectral fossils appear and pelt Barbaracle, doing decent damage, but still it marches closer, advancing on them menacingly. And then Gary hears a splash. Looking down, he sees that Charmander melted some of the snow when it used Flamethrower, and as Barbaracle steps into the newly created puddle, an idea strikes him. Without hesitation, he calls for a powder snow, and Amora happily obeys, blowing out a light dusting of snow which doesn't seem to bother Barbaracle at all. However, Barbaracle isn't the target, and as it goes to take its next step, it finds its feet frozen in place. As the wild barbarian roars in fury and bends down to shatter the ice, Gary calls for them all to attack while it's vulnerable, and so AJ and Joe's Pokemon charge in. This was in fact not Gary's plan, as he had wanted them to strike from afar, but it is too late now, and so he has Amora continue to use Ancient Power to cover for the other two. Charmander uses Skull Bash while Teddiursa uses Metal Claw again, and both hit fairly hard against the unarmored Barbaracle, but the brute is not one to allow such slights to go unpunished, and so with one of its lower arms it swats Charmander back with Stone Edge, while grabbing Teddiursa by the skull with its upper arms. Joe cries for his partner as Barbaracle savagely squeezes Teddiursa's head until its screaming dies down. It then tosses it aside towards the frozen lake. Joe instinctively runs towards it, leaping into the air and catching it in his arms before they both hit the ice, and unsurprisingly go through it into the Arctic waters below. Up until now, Blue has been standing to the side, allowing the kids to use this as an opportunity to grow, while also being ready to step in if things get out of hand, and by his approximation, seeing his student plummet into sub-zero water constitutes out of hand. Quick as a flash, he brings out his Golduck with orders to rescue Joe, but is beaten to the punch when Joe and Teddiursa are lifted out of the water. Looking down, they see the Tortuga from before crawl up onto shore with a pair on its back. It then raises its flippers and claps twice, with Joe imitating the action through shivering hands. He then thanks it for saving them as he returns Teddiursa to its ball, but Tortuga surprises him by scuttling forward and taking Teddiursa's place alongside Charmander and Amora. Joe takes the hint and so joins AJ and Gary for round 2 of this battle. At last, Barbaracle breaks free from the ice, and so stomps over to its 3 foes, but this time they are ready and so launch a coordinated assault. Amora, like before, provides cover fire with Ancient Power, while Tortuga slides forward on its belly and bites Barbaracle on the ankle, distracting the big brute just long enough for AJ to throw Charmander into the air, allowing it to land a Skull Bash from above. The pair of heads ring like twin gongs, but as Charmander lands on its feet, albeit shakily, Barbaracle falls backwards, its strategy of repeatedly cutting its own defenses coming back to bite it. Remembering his plan to catch it, AJ throws a Pokeball which hits Barbaracle just before it hits the ground, and after a moment of vigorous shaking, it fires off a trio of stars to show that the capture was successful. The 3 boys in blue let out a collective sigh of relief as AJ pockets the ball, swearing that it feels like Barbaracle is still trying to punch him from inside. Gary and Joe then thank the pair of prehistoric Pokemon for fighting alongside them, and say that they're sorry for messing up their home, but Thaddeus chuckles that he thinks Amora and Tortuga have chosen their home, and it's wherever these 2 fine young trainers are. The students of Blue both look up at him inquisitively, and Thaddeus smiles that to share an experience like that bonds a person in Pokemon for life, and unless he is much mistaken, these 2 now want to go with them. Gary and Joe ask if this is true, and Tortuga and Amora nod. It is approaching dusk when Red hears the bell above the cafe door jingle. He is seated across from Alana and Clement, as well as Clement's younger sister, a girl by the name of Bonnie, and is discussing the upcoming tournament with them. It is a pleasant experience for the champ, right up until he walks in. Lysander, with his smug smile, makes Red's hackles raise, and when he spots his arm around Ash's shoulder, it pushes him over the edge. Swiftly standing, Red marches over to the red-headed tycoon and in a low, deadly whisper demands that he take his hand off his protege right now. Raising both hands in a gesture of surrender, Lysander chuckles that he doesn't know what he's done to deserve such treatment, but whatever it is, he's sorry. After all, he'd hate to make an enemy of the world's greatest battler. However, Red isn't moved by this flattery, and so looks Lysander squarely in the eye as he states that what he did was ally himself with Giovanni. The few patrons in the cafe freeze, those old enough to remember Team Rocket knowing what a serious accusation this is, and the rest just responding to the tension coming off Red. Lysander alone seems untroubled, and so keeping up his easy smile affirms that he was an associate of Giovanni, back when he thought he was a respectable businessman and gym leader, not a vicious crime boss. Once he knew what kind of man Giovanni really was, he cut all ties, though he supposes this blame is warranted, since he allowed himself to be fooled, though in his defense, so did many others, including the people of Viridian City, the Pokemon Association, and Red's friend Professor Oak. At this last jab at the professor, Red's face goes from stony hatred to hot fury, and Ash can't help but think that Red might punch Lysander. However, the bearded man is still cool as a cucumber, and he continues that one of his great regrets is not seeing through Giovanni sooner, and every day he has to live with that guilt. But he hopes that Red is the sort of man who understands the weight of regret, and believes in second chances. Red curtly nods that he does, and Lysander says that this is marvelous. He then claps Ash on the back and thanks him once more for saving his life, promising that he will think up a way to repay him for that someday. He then walks past them, stopping only to lean in and whisper something to Alan before departing into a back room. When outside, Red asks Alan what Lysander said to him, and the stoic youth replies that he instructed him to win the whole tournament for the Kalos region. Red nods, not sure whether to believe this or not, and so brings out Aero. Ash, Alan, Clement, and Bonnie squeeze onto the fossil Pokemon's back, and Red goes to do the same until he feels a hand on his shoulder. Turning to see who it is, he finds himself looking up at a giant of a man, seemingly at least 9 feet tall. Even when the man kneels down, Red feels like a child in comparison, and so wonders what this man wants. By his clothing and odor, Red assumes that he might be a vagrant, and so goes to offer to buy him dinner and maybe give him some money for a place to spend the night. But the man places a giant finger to his lips to silence the champ, before placing his hand on Red's head. In a deep, sonorous voice, the big man rumbles, "You too are a king who bears a heavy crown," before standing and walking away as suddenly and inexplicably as he had appeared. Red goes to chase after him and demand to know what this man is talking about, or even who he is, but is stopped when he hears Ash's voice calling out to him, asking if he's coming. The complete lack of concern in Ash's voice, paired with the fact that when he looks back there is no trace of the mountainous man, makes Red wonder if he imagined him, and so he shakes his head as he takes his place on Aero's back as well. Thanks to the added weight of Alan, Clement, and Bonnie, it is night proper by the time the Lumiose gang arrive back in Ambret Town. Blue, Gary, Joe, and AJ are waiting for them by the Aqua, and with them are 3 new faces who Ash assumes are the other delegates. One of them he recognizes, Kalos champion and movie star Diantha, and when the group land, she is kind enough to introduce the other 2. Both are girls with blonde hair, one dressed in activewear while the other sports more formal attire. Diantha introduces the girl dressed in exercise gear as Karina, granddaughter of the Mega Evolution Guru, an aspiring gym leader, while the other she calls Astrid, one of the region's rising stars and a popular favourite to win this year's Kalos League. The Kanto delegation greet them all warmly, while Alan, Clement, and Bonnie take their places with the others at Diantha's side, though Bonnie does attempt to hit on Diantha, calling her a keeper and begging her to marry her brother until Clement pulls her away with a very red face. When Red and Blue have stopped laughing long enough to introduce their team, they guide their new friends to board the SS Aqua, eager to settle in for the night. When they are all on board, Lieutenant Surge lifts anchor and begins the voyage to their next regional destination. And that's where we'll leave things. What region will our heroes visit next? Who are the remaining delegates they have yet to meet? And precisely what sort of tournament awaits them all at the end of this trip? Find out when the journey continues.